So I'm Bruce Clevenger, John Rethmel beside me, and we're going to do this together. We both have mics, but I have the remote. So we came to an understanding, but he yielded to me. So we're going to talk about interseeding cover crops and growing corn and soybeans. This was, I guess, the first slide here. What we're going to talk about is, really why are we presenting today? We're presenting today because, if you didn't know, the Conservation Tillage Conference does provide seed money or grants to do on-farm research. And so John and I applied to support this project we're going to talk about today. So we felt it was appropriate to come back and share some of our 2017 experiences and what actually we learned and some of the results and really maybe more observations that we did in this project. And we're going to conclude today with maybe how to consider using some of our preliminary data. And as you know, preliminary data is not the entire picture for making a lot of decisions on. So that's kind of the introduction of what we want to kind of go through today. But really the essence of the research was a conversation that John has read about, asked a lot of people about, and we got into a conversation about some of the challenges that he had with establishing cover crops. And John, you want to explain some of those?
Sure. I farm with my uncle and my dad up in Defiance County, and we've had some interest in cover crops for maybe 8 years. And we've had a lot of challenges, and the biggest challenge we've had is just getting the cover crop established. We just don't have time after harvest to do that. So we've tried a lot of aerial application, high boy seeding, and it just really hasn't worked for us. We probably only get a stand maybe a third of the time with that, and I feel our biggest problem is slugs. There's a picture of slug feeding on a cereal rice seed that was just blown on top of the ground. So we have a lot of slug pressure in our area.
And it's not just a one-year slug experience. I'm working with John over the past several years. In your no-till system, slugs are predominantly observed or often observed to the point where their family have seen them migrate across the road like as if they were army worms. So in those situations, the seed are vulnerable out there, and the seed is something that slugs at certain times of the year will seek out and feed upon. So we wanted to move in a certain direction, and in conversation with John, cover crop seed in contact with soil, he thought increased his chances of success. And so like when you were talking about drilling, if you had time after harvest, getting that seed in contact with the soil was good. And the time for that top and the root to establish, because the benefits of the cover crop are not just above ground, but also those things that are below ground. And so John's not just a farmer like many of you. You're also an engineer, and you can build a lot of things in your shop. So what John did is he had an idea to build his interceder with road units, and we wanted to kind of show you what that looks like.
Yeah, we just kind of made a small test unit here. It's got a Valmar air seed box on it, and then we put Dawn Duo Seed interseeding units on it. The equipment functioned really well. I was really happy with the way that worked. It's the Valmar box is an air delivery box. It blows the seed out to each row, and it's kind of a double disc opener. It's an offset design, so it cuts through residue really well. Then the metering rolls, we've got different sizes for different size seeds, and the equipment worked well. As you can see on the machine there, we only put one of the Duo Seed units between each row. A couple of reasons, just kind of a test machine to see what would happen. And secondly, we tried it in some beans. We plant our beans on twin row spacing, and I don't think we could fit two of those between the gap. So that's kind of where we are today with just kind of a test unit.
So coming out of the shop, it was a pretty mobile unit attached to this tractor that we used for corn, and we'll show you the one that we used for attaching it or using it in the soybean crop. So John did a great job of constructing this, making it, and working with retailers on finding those components that he felt comfortable that were going to be working well in the field. So John's agronomy, the corn agronomy, basically give you a little bit of background on how corn is grown there. Often he has previous crop of soybeans. John has fields that we can get in and plant in a very timely manner, that April time period. And in the 2017 crop year, John selected a Roundup Ready or a glyphosate tolerant corn, and which we're working right now in the 2018 to develop a herbicide program for a conventional corn that will be compatible with the cover crop interseeding. And also the agronomy on John's corn is that we didn't really adjust his standard nitrogen rate for the 2017 year, and it was timely applied there the early to mid part of June. So John had some ideas about what species of cover crop to include in the project, and had some experience with those other ways, and kind of want to run down through those, John.
Sure. The species we did in our corn plot, we just did annual ryegrass and cereal rye. Our main reason for selecting those was it kind of simplified our herbicide selection. We relied on the Callisto to control our broadleaves, and then the glyphosate to take care of the grass. And also, we like to fall spray Banville and 2,4-D on our corn stalks, so we can do that and not affect the grass cover crop.
So the interseeding was done in corn after side dress, and our stage of development on the corn was at V6. And John's not a speedy driver often, but he was moving at about a clip of about 9 miles an hour when going through that cornfield. So you noticed on one of the treatments there was a no cover crop, and that's where I hope to contribute to John's goal of finding information. Because at the end of the day, the end of the year, we wanted to have a research project that was designed properly so that we can, with some level of confidence, know that if we saw differences in yield or soil conditions, we knew it was because of the variables that we applied in the field, not because of some other random characteristics within that field. So a proper research design was important with the 3 treatments, a randomized complete block, and we were able, given the field size that John had dedicated to this project, we were able to replicate those 5 times within this field. And so you can see kind of the layout here. Rep 1 contains all 3 of those treatments. And then Rep 2, 3 through 5, those same treatments are just kind of mixed up and randomized within each one of those blocks. Again, at the end of the year, we're able to run statistics that are going to give us some confidence that if we see numbers differentiating between the treatments, we know they're because of the treatment, not because of something else going on in the field.
Yeah, this picture just shows the seed drive transmission on the Valmar box. You just change a series of sprockets to change your different seeding rates.
And so come June 19th was the first time out of the barn with this, and even before I got there, I noticed that John was out in the field testing it out even before I got there. He was gaining his confidence. He had built this thing. It was his newborn child. And so we went to the field and implemented this study. So starting to plant and interseed into corn. Soil conditions were important. Here John is evaluating seed placement, seed coverage, and really making adjustments on depth and knowing that we had some good soil conditions. And in fact, I think, John, you recorded about a 1/4 inch of rain shortly after we interseeded that first into corn.
Yeah, we kind of got chased out of the field there by a little storm cloud, but it was perfect conditions. The previous picture there where I'm kind of digging for some seed, you can kind of see the unit leaves very little soil disturbance. Even at 9 miles an hour, we could have gone a lot faster, and I thought it did a really nice job, and you could hardly even tell that unit was in the field.
So we did get that rain shower. You saw that at the back, and the nice thing about this tractor selection, it was the same tractor you used at planting time, so it had your guidance system in place, and he was able to kind of really be on mark in every pass. And he felt bad running over a little bit of corn to get started, but all in all, it was where it needed to be in that row. So we also conducted a study for soybeans, and John's agronomy on soybeans is, in this case, it was previous crop was soybeans, planted timely mid-May. John described his twin row planter that he plants a majority of his or all of his beans with, the 8-inch paired rows on 30-inch centers, which does leave that 22 inches of soil exposure, or really the place where canopy occurs, and but it allows a space for that interseeding to occur. And so to add a little bit of extra variables to this study, we did not just one planting date, because with corn we were really limited in that one time just after side dress, but in soybeans, we felt there were at least 3 opportunities to plant. And again, John, you want to describe our species and timing?
Sure. Again, we did the annual ryegrass and the cereal rye, and we had enough room. We tried some oats in there also, just to try a different species. We chose the grass again, basically because of the herbicide issues, trying to work around the residuals. That's one of my big concerns about this is, we trimmed our residual program back to try to accommodate the cover crops, and I don't know if that's a good idea long term or not, so we'll keep testing it.
So we have, those emerging weeds just like everybody else, certainly mare's tail and water hemp in Defiance County that are asking more maybe residuals in our program. So their interseeding dates had an interseeding date July 26th, August 9th, and September 11th, and we saw that there were quite a bit of difference. As you can imagine, soil conditions were ideal when we planted July 26th. It was moist, it was like the garden, very mellow. But we moved into August and September. It was pretty shocking to see how hard and how dry the conditions were in placing seed into that hostile environment, I thought, for that seed to do well. But at least when we did plant that, we had seed to soil contact, and that's one of the goals to achieve. And so with this soybean study, we had really 3 factors, and those were the dates of planting, and then we had the 3 treatments of the seed species selection, and then the control of none at all. So this got a little more complicated because we still maintained a randomized complete block. We had all 10 treatments in every replication, which gave us some additional strength at the end of the year to do the analysis. I really felt like a traffic control or a director of traffic because I had my clipboard and I knew, John, these are the highlighted ones we're going to plant today, and just getting into the right field, the right spot was important. So July 26th, the beans were really doing well. We had a little bit of space opening there in the canopy, and again, the field conditions were really good. Tractor selection here was a little different than that one before, but it was one that fit soybeans better.
Yeah, no auto steer on this one, I'm afraid. So we had to go old school there. That's the only tractor we had with skinny enough tires to get down the rows. So.
And then again, checking field conditions, and it really felt good. And you see John adjusting even between different species of seed, and then for the soil conditions in July, again, were different than what we ended up with in September. And I applaud John on this slide because he sought out quality seed for each species that he planted. He wanted to make sure that this was a variable that did not cause the project to fall apart. He wanted to have quality seed that had good germ, or at least if it had an 80 or so or 89% germ, we could at least adjust that seeding rate to make sure that we are getting the right amount of viable seed in there. So this is just a shot of compliments to him to making sure that that was one of the variables that we covered in this project. And then by September 11th, we were into really that R7, which is beginning of maturity, and leaf fall. And I think, John, your past experience has been this is typically the time that you would have flown cover crop seed on.
Right. As far as the aerial application or the high boy, we've experimented with a lot of different timings. We have a neighbor who has a high boy outfitted for cover crop application. They've worked with us on it, and we've gone earlier. I've gone as much as the morning before we harvested.
Now, John, was your problem with the fall seeded cover crops through the high boy plane because you didn't get timely rains afterwards, or?
That's a good question. We even had instances where we would have an inch of rain the same night that the cover crop was applied, and the slugs still took it out. They're so thick, and I think there's maybe no other food source for them at that time, so we lay that seed on top, and it's right there ready for them to eat. So one thing I did want to point out with this picture, with our different timings, I wanted to get different growth stages of the beans. These beans were really hurt early on from way too much rain. As you can see, we hardly closed the rows. So I question when we get a big growthy bean that really canopies well, I don't know how our seed will survive that, because we didn't have that situation this year. So
And so as we look at soil conditions, everybody see the crack in the soil? This would be that September 11th. Probably not a foreign sight for you when you walk some of your fields that have a clay content, but making adjustments in the field to make sure that the seed is getting where it should be and where it's placed properly. So here's some pictures of after the fact growing. This would be August 10th within that cornfield. This is annual ryegrass in this cornfield, just one of the replications that we have in the treatment. Showing some pictures here of what it looks like planting July 26th of this year into that twin row bean system. This is annual ryegrass, and you can maybe kind of depict the twin rows of soybeans, but then how well is that annual ryegrass looking when we interseed it in the later part of July. Cereal rye, you can really define that green, and maybe farmers driving by thinking, did John intentionally plant weeds in his field? But how did he get those weeds to grow so uniformly in the strip? But I think most people in the area saw us out there, either me taking pictures or John randomly driving around the field. We got a little bit of attention. So this is cereal rye there on that early July or late July planting date. And then oats also responded well in their growth throughout the summer for establishment. Even to the point where at harvest, we observed a little bit of the July planted oats going to seed, so they can advance through their growth and development stage. When you get to a September 11th planting, you probably can't even see the green in this slide, but there is specks of annual ryegrass. The cereal rye looked very similar as far as overall size. And then September planting of oats, a little bit deeper green color, but at least we got a start really at the time of planting or right before harvest, getting that jump start on the cover crop establishment. And then after harvest, about 10 days after that September 11th planting date, the fields were harvested, strips were collected, the yield data gathered, and you can just kind of see the really thicker, greener patterns there are the oats, and then the annual rye and cereal rye look pretty similar post-harvest. To the point where John felt he was clipping, a fair amount of green from those July planted cover crops.
Yeah, and so, especially on some of the oats, they had enough growth that we did clip an inch or two off, but there wasn't enough mass out there, and it was really dry during harvest, so there was no issue. But I could see where it possibly could be a concern in some cases.
So what you might notice also in these pictures, we're not getting complete coverage of cover crop. This is a percentage of the land that's covered with a crop. And so if your goal was to establish a thick cover crop, so you had a 70% cover or somewhere north of that, just the system that this is interseeding into just doesn't allow that. And that can be a downside. It's just a nature of the design. So tentatively, we are sharing some results on yield. You'll see that the corn crop, we did not see a statistically difference in the yields where the annual ryegrass was grown, the cereal rye, and then the no cover crop. You will notice that there's an 8 or 9 bushel trend in some of the numbers, but they don't trend necessarily that a particular cover crop was worse or better than no cover crop response. And granted that this is a 1-year study, we're going to continue this project and continue to do the design and the statistics to do it. The yield response gets a little muddier or complicated because there's more data points in the soybean interseeding. And so statistically, when you see a yield stand alone by itself, like the oats at the T1, which would be the first timing of planting, that A alone statistically is different than the C alone, the last 3 on the list. And so those are the only ones that are really statistically different from the yield standpoint during the 2017 year. But with a grain of salt, this was 1 year's worth of data. And so John and I and others, we were digging into these numbers and trying to figure out if we had to guess in the early season, we would have maybe figured that the early planted cover crop would have negatively influenced the grain produced by the end of the year. And it didn't always turn out that way. So more years into this trial are going to help sort out some of those differences as we move forward.
Yeah, this picture is just some of the species we dug up just about a week ago here. And from left to right, it's annual ryegrass, cereal rye, and then another cereal rye photo. The first two, the bigger plants, are early interseeded in the beans. And then that last plant, the small one, was planted after bean harvest, October the 10th. So a really extremely significant difference in the amount of growth on those.
And these are plants that were randomly dug and not necessarily lined up with all of our treatments and replications, but a good example of what maybe we might expect top growth, bottom growth as well.
John, as it got harder and drier, are you able to adjust the down pressure on your machine to that seed and soil contact?
You want to repeat his question?
Yeah, so the question was about the duo seed unit and the downforce for when the soil got hard. And it is adjustable. There's an airbag on there. You can change the pressure. And it really worked well, even when the ground was really hard. It's kind of it's a narrower angle than a regular planter opener and a leading edge colder, so there was no issue there. It really performed well.
And the toolbar that he built does have the ability to add additional row units between the row, but as John indicated, there's going to be some years where his soybean canopy is going to be too dense that even running a single row unit down between the rows plus the tire traffic could interfere with some soybean harvest, or at least cause some yield loss in that fashion. But so the unit is preliminary, but it's also expandable to additional units. And had some assistance with this project, of course, the Conservation Tillage Conference that we applied for a grant. A local dealer, supplier, Paul Martin Sons, also assisted, also Kenfeld Group, and then we also have a local Defiance Agricultural Research Association that provided some funding for the project for it to get underway for the 2017 year with hopes of at least 3, if not additional years in the project. So again, 2017 was really about some experience. Compliments to John. As you noticed, John's the brains and the engineer. I'm more the photographer and the traffic control guy of where to be in the field and maybe the data analysis. But it was a good relationship to have both parts in a project like this, and I encourage you to develop that collaboration with somebody in your county as well. Preliminary data, we definitely need more years, and I think we had our hands full with the size of the field. This was not a small field. These were not short strips. This was a dedication that John had in land and time and resources to implement this project. I think we're pretty good on time, Glenn. We do have a time for a few questions.
Are you going to try any nitrogen-producing cover crops in your soybeans for going to corn?
Yeah, so the question was, will we try any like legumes that will produce nitrogen in the soybeans for the following year's corn? We'll play with it a little bit. The herbicide issue's really going to be a challenge, but I think we'll do some small-scale testing on that.
What crop? Any crop? Any certain legume?
No certain species picked out yet.
After you harvested beans and you only had the single row of the grass species, did you load the drill up with something else and follow in so you could get some good seed to soil contact on?
So the question was, after harvest in the beans, we only had that single 30-inch row. Did we go out and plant anything additional? And the answer is no, we didn't. Kind of goes back to that time issue. We just don't have time to do the harvesting and planting.
Question.
You know if slugs feed on smaller seeds equally, like clover or radish, relative to rye?
The question is, will slugs feed on smaller seeds like clover or radishes? And I don't have a lot of experience with those species to really answer that for you.
Yes,
What's
sir.
your predominant soil type and organic matter?
Okay, so the soil type here was laddie clay. Organic matter probably 2.5%, 3%.
And these have been long-term no-till fields in John's rotation and his family's rotation for many years. Yeah, Tyler.
I guess I would want to add to your guys' presentation. I mean, John has tried. We've had a lot of guys in the county try different aerial applications, with a lot of Bruce, I think you coined the phrase a couple of years ago. You were kind of a support group for the cover crop people there. And we struggle with that. So I got to applaud John for attempting this and trying to get started on something that you just get tired of 30% of the time a cover crop working with an aerial application. And I don't think it's for lack of our people trying. I think for some reason, I don't know if it's all slugs or if it's soil type or what, but you really struggle. And I've even asked like Hans Koch, and I mean, he doesn't deal specifically with Ohio, but even as northeast part of Indiana, said, well, for some reason we struggle up there. And so I applaud you guys for trying to figure out another method.
Yeah, thanks. And Tyler, you talked about a support group. It is good to be able to talk to people that have struggled and learned, and that's part of the conversation here today. And really, when the conservation incentive dollars go away, I see John and other producers maybe in this room as well wanting to hang on to cover crops because we do see the benefits to the soils and also maybe the nutrient recycling. But at the same time, we are a low-cost producer of commodities, and we have to know that our inputs for crop production are going to have some benefit that we can tangibly see or know that it's helping from an environmental standpoint.
Could your setup that you've built and designed easily be converted to a multi-species seeding mix?
Yeah, so the question is, could you seed multi-species with that? Yeah, as long as they're pre-mixed, we couldn't have two separate hoppers, but mixed together, yep, that'd work fine.
How do you nurse the Vollmer unit? How do you put your seed in?
Yeah, we just step ladder and carry a bag up there, so it's not real convenient.
Yeah, you might have saw that picture with the step ladder and the bag. So, yeah. Good questions. We really appreciate the questions. Our last question or so, we'll turn you over to the lunch crew. Hey, thanks for your time. Oh, yep.
If you're having this much trouble with slugs just spreading the seed, how are you handling slugs in the spring? Is planting green help or not?
The question was, we have all this slug pressure in the fall with our cover crops. What about the spring? And surprisingly, we haven't had huge issues in the spring, which you would think that we would. But typically, I think our cash crops are outgrowing the slugs. But there's times where we have lost some stand on beans. As far as the planting green, I probably don't have enough experience with that to say it's going to help. I do know that, if I do have a good stand of a cover crop, sometimes it's hard to close that seed trench from all the roots when I'm planting my beans. And that's definitely a bad thing because the slugs follow right down that seed trench.
Again, thanks for your time. Enjoy the rest of your conference today and tomorrow.